All right, good morning, everyone. Hope you all had a great weekend. I'm actually going to start today by talking about assignment 4 and actually assignment 3 a little bit as well. So if you haven't got assignment 3 submitted yet, don't worry. I'm actually still not done grading assignment 2 yet. I'm running behind as well. So due dates are somewhat flexible, as I've said. But hopefully you're making progress. I've been talking to people about assignment 3, which is great. Sounds like a lot of people are getting it done. We're going to start by going through, I'm actually going to begin this assignment with you all today because it's such a different assignment. So I'm actually going to start by actually, give you a little bit of a head start, do the first little part of the assignment together as a class, and then turn you loose on the rest of it. And then we'll switch gears and talk about a different topic for the second half of class. I'm going to do things a little bit differently. You're welcome to go ahead and follow the same process that I know you're already familiar with, to click the link and make a repository, load it into Eclipse. I'm actually, in the spirit of this class, going to use the command line to clone this repository. So you don't have to do it this way, but you're welcome to follow along with me if you'd like to, because I'm going to show you that one of the things that is a little bit inconvenient about using Git in scripts is something that I got several people email me about this weekend. Git spits out a whole bunch of information, right? Anytime you do something, anytime you clone a repository or add something to a repository, it spits out a whole bunch of information, which is useful unless you're actually trying to use it within a script that is supposed to generate particular output. So I was trying to make the assignment 3 instructions simpler, and I did, but then I inadvertently introduced this side effect where, in the middle of all the other stuff, there's probably all this extra output from Git commands. That's what I was getting a lot of emails about this week, and that's my fault, so I want to make that clear. If you've already submitted your assignment and it has all that extra Git output in there, then you're totally fine. That's not something that you need to worry about. That is totally my bad. But also, the solution is not that difficult, so I wanted to show it to you since it is pretty simple. Some of you actually already figured it out. You Googled it and figured out the answer. I thought that was great. I was really happy to see that. But for those of you who are still wondering what you might do about this problem, there's something on every Linux-based machine, which is what we're using, Linux-based command line, called dev null. You can think of it as a black hole, basically. It's a void. It's empty, empty space. If you ever want to get rid of output from any command, not just Git, but if there's any command that you're using that you don't want to see the output of, you can use the redirect. That's what those arrows are. We talked about that, right? You can redirect it right into dev null, and it just proved me wrong. Thanks a lot. Let me try it again a different way with the ampersand. Let me remove the repository and try it again. I'll get it. Oh wow, where did I didn't clone this repository where I wanted it anyway. It is called there it is. All right. So with an ampersand, let's see. There we go. Yeah. So the ampersand actually starts the process in the background. I think that's an important piece of the equation that I forgot the first time I ran the command. So it actually ran the clone. We haven't seen this exact flavor of a redirect. This is a redirect. Again, the ampersand says run this process in the background and then send any output to this black hole called dev null. So if you add this little snippet at the end of any line in your script, if you add that little snippet at the end of any line in your script that you don't want to see the output of, it should hopefully remove it the next time you run the script. So it's a pretty simple fix. I can show you that the repository is in fact there by cding into it. So it did actually go through the clone, right? But also, again, you don't have to do that because that's my bad. I screwed up I screwed up the URL the first time, and then this is the second screw up I've had on this assignment. So My fault. Sorry about that. Sorry if you were confused about it. Yeah, what's up? That's okay.
Is that fine?
Yeah,
Even if
that's fine.
you have to but it also doesn't know to do it twice in a row and not have the person do that.
I'm not sure I understand. So the question was, the script doesn't delete the repositories at the end. I don't have a problem with that if the repositories are still there after the script is running.
But does it have to work twice in a row?
No, not necessarily. No, it doesn't have to work twice in a row. Yeah, if it clones the repos and goes through, spits out the grades, that's all I care about. Yep. I understand now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like this assignment does still have a little bit more tweaking to do, but I always try and improve things every semester. This semester, I made this one a little worse. Sorry about that for the extra confusion. That was not my intention, but if you're still working on it, please don't feel like you need to bang your head up against this stuff forever. Shoot me an email, come into my office sometime, let me know what you're stuck on. I'll give you a push in the right direction. And let's move back to the task at hand, which is homework assignment 4. Now that I've actually cloned it, this is kind of going back to something that we talked about last week. This repository contains, the .class path and the .project files, and those are the two that I talked about as being important for anything you want to load into Eclipse. So since we've already cloned this repository, we can actually load it directly into Eclipse. It's a little bit of a different process than what you're used to. Eclipse, if you do it the way that we show you to, like in 131 for example, it will, Eclipse is basically cloning the repository for you in the background. But we've already cloned the repository ourselves, so if we want to, we can just tell Eclipse to go find the project once it's done loading here. It's Monday. There it goes. All right. So when you go to import this, since we've already done the cloning, we don't need to worry about this Git part. Up here at the top, we'll select existing projects. So it's an existing project. We already cloned it. So the project is already on our computer. We already have the repository. It's already there. So we'll hit next, and then we have to browse to where we think, or to where we know the repository is, which in my case, I just put it right in my home folder. It's called, here it is. Just click on the folder that contains it. So this is the folder that I cloned from Git. It finds the repository, and I can hit finish, and now we're all loaded up. The nice thing about this as well, by doing it this way, Eclipse is still smart enough to know that this is part of the Git repository. So I can still do my commits and pushes through here, even though I cloned it on the command line. I think that's a pretty useful thing to know about. You can run Git commands either through Eclipse or through the command line, and they both affect the repository the same way, basically. They have the exact same effect. So you can use whichever one you feel the most comfortable doing. All right, let's talk about homework 4. This is going to be a different one than pretty much every homework assignment you've seen in any of your classes so far. I'm assuming. I suppose maybe some of you have done stuff like this, but the only thing that I'm asking you to write and submit for this homework assignment are tests, unit tests. So I'm not asking you to write any functional code. I'm asking you to write unit tests that show me the behavior of a simple spell checker program. I am not asking you to write a spell checker. That is not what I'm asking you to do, right? Some people get very tempted. They want to write the spell checker and make the spell checker actually work. I'm not going to stop you. It's your time. It's your energy. If that's how you want to approach this, then okay. But I don't think you have to do it that way, and I would recommend not doing it that way and trying to approach this from a test-driven development perspective, which says I'm going to write the tests first, think about the design of the program as I'm writing the tests, and then if I want to write the code later, I can go back and write the code later. So what I would like to do is kind of give you a head start. I'm going to write the first test for you right now. kind of review the unit testing framework that we discussed last week. Every unit test has 3 steps. What's the first step? First step of writing a unit test. Yeah. Setting up objects. Okay. In this case, what are we testing? We're testing a spell checker. So the spell checker is going to be my object, right? One of the first things that we need to decide on is, what is the object? Spell checker. I'm telling you right now, it's a spell checker. How do we create one of these things? What does the constructor look like? So how do we actually create a spell checker? The biggest question when creating a spell checker is to think about, does it have any input parameters that it needs? And so to answer this question, you do have to think a little bit about the internals of the spell checker. What does it contain? Or if we're talking about this in a design-oriented way, what are the hazas of a spell checker? I am imagining that there's some kind of data structure in there, right? Some kind of a collection in there. Is it an array list? Is it an array? Is it is it a tree or a map? Yes, right? I actually think it could be any of those things. I think there is one data structure that probably makes more sense than all of the others, but this really isn't the class for that. That's more of a 247 kind of a question, right? Talking about data structures. But there is some kind of a collection that is remembering the words, right? So the spell checker is essentially just a collection of words. It's a dictionary, which might lead you to thinking that it's a map, but hold your horses, maybe not so much, right? It's just a tracking of words that we know about. And so, how many words do we know about when we first create our spell checker? Why don't we just assume that we don't know about any words? There are 0 words that we are aware of, right? Such a spell checker would not be very useful. It would tell me that everything is spelled wrong because it wouldn't recognize any words being spelled properly. But we're going to fix that eventually. That's going to be, something that we can think about as we continue the design of this process. For now, I'm going to assume that this spell checker starts out empty, doesn't know about any words. We're going to have a way of telling it what words we care about. And if you think about things in real life, that's actually true. Like on your phone, if you start typing out a word that it doesn't recognize, you have a way to add that word to the spell checker, right? To make sure that it doesn't flag that every single time you type it out. That is a thing that's possible. So, all right, empty spell checker. What's step 2? Step 2 of writing unit tests. Call the method that's being tested. So we haven't answered that question yet. What method are we being tested? What method is being tested right now? Let's go talk about the instructions real quick. This bulleted list right here is giving you a list of behaviors. You can think of it as a list of requirements. These are things that we want our spell checker to be able to do. I'm sure we could think of more things to add to this list, but for the purposes of this assignment, there's 8 things on this list. So the one at the very top of the list says a spell checker should be able to tell us how many words it currently knows about. We talked about in class last week that every method should have at least one test associated with it. So I think what I'm trying to do right now is to write a test for that bullet point. But what method is actually associated with that test? Well, it doesn't exist yet. We have to decide on what that method is. That's kind of what we're doing right now. We're using the unit test to help us drive the design. All right, it needs to be able to tell us how many words it currently knows about. That sounds an awful lot like some sort of a getter method. So anytime there's an action that needs to be performed, right? That's method called? What parameters does it have? Those are decisions that we now have to make, that we are now going to make, and we'll make them as we write the test. There's some flexibility here, right? We get to decide what the method is called, but if it's returning the number of words, that's probably going to be an integer, right? I don't expect there to be half words in this. It's not really a thing. So, SC is my object, my spell checker object. To call a method on it, we use that dot notation, right? And then now I have to decide what I want this method to be called. What is the method going to be called that returns the number of words? I feel like most people would probably call it something like get number of words or something along those lines. You don't have to call it exactly the same thing, that's fine. But it's a pretty descriptive name, right? Tells us what it's doing. You might even be able to envision what such a method would look like. You've probably seen a similar method to that before. Step 3. What's step 3 of writing unit tests? Check your answer is correct, and we use assertions to do that. So we're going to use assertions. If I can type today. So in this case, we're saying the spell checker is empty. Literally knows no words. Create a brand new spell checker. So I would say something like assert true words is equal to 0, right? It's empty. It doesn't know anything. And once I'm finished with the test, I think it's important to realize that, this is within a test method, so we should probably give this a more descriptive name as well. Empty spell checker. Yeah. Something like that. This method, I think, is enough to satisfy this bullet point. But let's talk about this next one real quick. I'm not going to give you all the code like I did for the last one. But let's talk about the thought process for this one. It's a little bit more complicated. It says the number of words a spell checker should know about should go up by 1 whenever a new word is added. So what action exists in this description that we haven't talked about yet? Yeah. Adding a word. So there has to be some way to add words. We've already kind of talked about that a little bit before, I suppose. But so what is this test going to look like relative to this one? Think about it. If we want to prove that adding a word causes the number of words to go up by 1, I guess I'll give you a little bit of this one. We'll say... that's not a good test name, actually. I don't know. That's maybe not great either, but I'm struggling to think of a better one, so I'm going to roll with it for now. Your setup is going to be the same, essentially, as up above. The method under... The method under test... There's probably going to be 2 of them now, right? At least. We need to add a word. Think about that method. So that's what's going to go here. And then get the number of words. And then for step 3, using an assertion, it's not going to look that much different than this assertion, right? The only difference is probably just the number. So think about it. All of the tests are basically going to follow this format. Sometimes step 2 will require a little more effort than step 1 and step 3. Sometimes step 3 might require a little bit more effort. Sometimes you might need to prove more than one thing to justify that it's working properly. Right? Check more than one value to prove that it's actually working the way that it's intended. I guess one final tip that I would like to say is that you can use multiple assertions here. Don't feel like you're limited to just one. If you need to run an assertion on 2 different values to prove to me that it's working the way that it should, then do that. That's okay. But one final time, I want to reiterate that there is no spell checker, right? It does not exist. Eclipse is telling me that, and that might be the most frustrating part of this assignment for people, is the fact that that red's not going to go away. I mean, you can make it, if it's really bothering you, you can make it go away just by making the class, right? Just make your spell checker class, and that will at least get Eclipse off of your back for, well, but now this method doesn't exist, right? So it's just going to be a domino effect. That's not going to stop happening. I don't want you to write this code. I just want to see the tests. We can use the tests to describe how we want the object to work. That's really what we're doing here, right? I'm using the unit test to describe how I want this object to work, how I want it to behave. That also means that there's not necessarily going to be a single correct answer for all of these other ones. They do get more complicated down here, especially for some of these ones at the end, right? These are a little trickier than the ones at the top of the list. Started with some of the easier ones, but let me know if you get stuck. Let me know if you have any questions. They will all follow that same format though, 1, 2, 3. And then don't forget about the ability as well that we have to use that annotation I talked about before each, I think it was, to help, to help with the setup. The before each method is very handy. You're not required to use before each for this assignment, but I do think that if you decide to give it a go, it'll make your code a lot cleaner and more concise, which is kind of the thing we care about in this class. Does anybody have any questions about this assignment? I know it's going to feel a little different every time I talk to students. And I know some of you probably will try to write the spell checker. Okay. I would encourage you to at least try and do it without writing the spell checker first. But if you really want to, then I'm not going to stop you. It's not that complicated, honestly, especially if you are good with data structures. But you don't have to do that to complete this assignment. It's not necessary. Okay. And let's move on to the topic of the day. And actually, it's going to be kind of the same topic that we talk about for the next few weeks. We're going to talk about clean code. So for the next 3 classes, we're going to talk about not just how to write code that's functional, but how to write code that is easy to read and understand. That's what we care about. We care about code quality. So I'm going to go through some examples today. Today we're focused on naming, so what the names of things should be. You probably are already aware of this. This is one of the first things we talk about to students in 131 as well, but we actually don't go into much detail on naming, and you all are more advanced programmers than you were in 131, so now's a good time to have a more detailed conversation about what names should look like for various parts of our program. Next class on Wednesday, we're going to talk all about methods. That's actually a really fun one. I like refactoring methods. That's one of my favorite parts of cleaning up code. And then for the final part of clean code, we're going to talk about objects. And so we're going to get a lot more reinforcement of how to use objects, as well as how to write good objects, good classes. So we're kind of working our way from the small scale and then broadening our focus as we go. Today we're talking about naming, though, and I set up a repository that I'm going to use in class today. I would encourage you to load this up in Eclipse and follow along if you would like to. It's here on the calendar. It's called the naming repo. I'm just going to do it the quick and easy way this time, even though I do enjoy the command line. Sometimes just want to use Eclipse and get it done quickly. Oh, This is not the topic for today, but this is such a common error. It says such and such is not an empty directory, so it refuses to move beyond this window. This is actually a very simple thing that happens all the time since 131C. It just means that you've already cloned this once before. The project maybe isn't in Eclipse anymore, you deleted the project, but it won't clone it again because the folder is still there from the last time, and it won't erase that stuff. So the easiest way to get around it is to just tell it to put the stuff in a different folder by putting a number or something on the end. Or you could go delete the old folder, which you probably don't need anyway, and then restart this process. Here we go. There's only one file in here. It's called dice. And it's pretty ugly, in my opinion, although when you look at it, you might think that it seems somewhat reasonable in terms of formatting. I mean, this isn't particularly an unusual way to code things up. I would argue that it's hard to tell what this code is doing, though, just by looking at it. And we can even run this code, right? And see that, oh no, there's an error. That's not good. So how do we even go about fixing this code? Well, in order to properly debug this and figure out where the problems are, we need to know, what these variables represent, what they do. And I would argue that while we could probably spend some time and try to figure that out, which is kind of what we're going to do, the way that it's written right now is not helping us at all. Not that much. We can't run this program. We can't see what it's doing to help us understand this code. So all we have to go off of are basically the variable names, and they're single letters. Some of them, I guess, are more than that. We also have the very descriptive array variable name, which I love. I'm sure you've probably used it. I use it, right? Yes, that is an array. We can tell that already by the fact that we've got the square brackets over here. So let's go back and see if we can't think about how to switch this up, make this a little bit more understandable. The name of the class is actually not terrible. It's called dice, and that's maybe the best clue that we have. This is actually, D also for the number of dice. How many dice are we rolling right now? But D is a terrible name for that variable, and I would actually go so far as to argue that single letter variable names are a bad practice, with some very notable exceptions. Using I for a for loop, totally fine, right? That's a classic, that's a standard computer science practice. So doing stuff like that, I and J and all that fun business, not a problem. But for just a regular old variable, using a single letter variable name, bad idea. This could be a bajillion different things. There are so many words that start with the letter D that this thing could be. So let's give it a more descriptive name, and let's use Eclipse to help us out. What we're doing today is a very important part of coding. We're trying to, well, there are some errors here that we're going to try to fix as we go along, but really we're just trying to clean up. And the coding name for cleaning up is refactor. I know that's a word you've probably heard before, maybe. We talk about it in 131 a little bit, but that's really the name of the game for us in this class is refactoring, cleaning up after ourselves. And the nice thing about Eclipse and any good IDE is that they will provide refactoring tools for us. That's something that a text editor like Vim, Visual Studio Code, is probably not going to provide for you as much. Although VS Code might, anyway, discussion for a different day perhaps. If I highlight this variable D, I've decided I want to change the name of this variable. I could just, say, all right, number of dice, right? But then I also have to go in here and find all of the times that D shows up, right? And replace it there as well. And there could be a lot of different places where that shows up. So instead, we can have the IDE help us out. I can highlight this letter D, the variable name, right-click on it and go to the refactor menu. and select rename. It's now saying I have to press enter to refactor. It's waiting for me to delete the letter D and type in a new name for it. So if I backspace, you'll notice that anywhere the letter D showed up later on in the code also disappears, right? It has found all of the instances where this variable appears, and now as I type in the new variable name, you'll see that it's appearing everywhere that this variable was used. That's pretty cool, right? That's what my 3-year-old son would. That's pretty cool, Dad. That's what he would say. All right. I hit enter once I've replaced the name with the name that I care about. This next variable is even more confusing. We have even less information about it. I know what this variable is supposed to represent because, of course, I came up with this code. But just from looking at it, I think it's very different. I see it's used here as part of the array. It's used here as part of the bounds of the loop. So it has something to do. It looks like we're going from I to number of dice here. So this is rolling the dice. And then this is telling us the number of, the number of throws. How many times am I rolling the dice? So I have 4 dice, and I'm rolling them 7 times, and I'm tracking the results, right? So this variable name, I would argue, is even worse. It's the number of throws, but I called it off. Like what, but this is a realistic expectation of how people write code. You've probably written code with lots of single letter variable names. I do it all the time because it's quick, it's easy. I'm not telling you should stop doing that. I'm saying that once you're done and you've fixed, you've got the code working the way you like it, go back and look for those single letter variable names that you use to, in the heat of the moment, and switch them out for something that makes more sense. So this one should be changed as well. So I'll right click, go to refactor, and rename. This is the number of throws. I've already made a joke about this, but it truly is a terrible variable name. Terrible variable name. Naming an array, naming a list. Like, yes, obviously there are those things. If the name of the variable contains any part of the type, right? That's not a good name. You could actually argue that I'm kind of doing that up here, right? Number, where the type's already an int. Yeah, obviously it's a number. It's declared as an integer, right? That one I think is maybe a little bit more forgivable than calling an array an array. What am I actually doing? I'm tracking, the throws that are being made. So I'm literally writing down every dice that's been rolled every time I roll the dice. That's what this array is keeping track of. So, let's give it a name that more properly reflects its purpose in this program. It's a roll tracker, right? Is that a good name? It's somewhat subjective. Maybe you think that's a terrible name. I would argue that it's better than the name that was here. I think most people could agree with that. It's better than just the generic array variable name, and sometimes that's good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's see what we can do to improve it. Let's see what we can do to make things better. I'm actually going to skip this one for now. We'll come back to it in just a little bit. Let's see if doing any of that has helped us figure out this error. Because if we could run this code, it'll really help us kind of figure out the rest of the clues. So I'm going to run it again and see if now we can figure out. It's telling us the first roll is all 4s. That already seems very suspicious, right? That already seems suspicious. And now it's telling me that the index out of bounds is taking place. So hopefully you all know this, but if you don't, this is telling me the line number where the error happened, and you can actually just click on it and it'll take you there. So that's actually a nice thing to be able to do. It is trying to insert the value into our roll tracker array, so that's good. we actually have more context here. I'm not quite sure what D2 is, but if I look at the line, it looks kind of like that's our die roll. It's trying to put it in at this position, and it's saying that index 4 is out of bounds for length 4. So we know that 4 is number of dice. That is our number of columns over here. But if we look at how the loops are written, I can see that number of dice is tied to I, which is used for the number of rows. There's our problem, right? This is actually a classic problem. This loop's iterating based on the number of dice when I think it should be iterating based on the number of throws, and this should be based on the number of throws. We got the loops swapped. That's what I think the issue is. The loops are swapped. It's a classic problem. The loops were swapped, but the way that it was originally written, that would have been very, very, very tricky to figure out. Let's see if we can, no, we still got a problem. Oh, but it's on a different line, and you can see that we succeeded in the first roll. So that's good. The sum is wrong. Huh, it's a little weird. We're still rolling all 4s. Also weird. Oh, well, here we go. What happened here? Does anybody know? There's a little story that happened here. The name of this variable used to be D. There's another variable that is here that we haven't really figured out. Well, we kind of figured it out. It's called D2. So what happened? They were trying to print out D2, and they printed out variable D instead. And then when we renamed it to be the number of dice, we saw that we saw what happened. So this is supposed to be D2. That's why that value is looking a little off. If we go down to line 5 or line 25, yeah. So can't quite figure this out. I think we have to do some more variable renaming before we can maybe decipher what's going on down here. Let me see if we at least fix the rolls problem. Yeah, there we go. 2, 2, 5, 4 sums to 13. All right, great. Perfect. Since we've already sort of identified what D2 is, let's see if maybe changing this variable name will help us. While I'm here, let me mention that anytime you have a number on the end of a variable, especially if it's like you're using that number as a counter, right? Average 1, average 2, average 3, average 4. That's a red flag. That is a sign that, you need a collection of averages, perhaps a list of averages, perhaps an array of averages, perhaps. Anytime you see a number on the end of something, it's either a sloppy choice, right? I already used D, but I really want to call this variable D, so I'm just going to slap 2 on the end. That's just not a descriptive name, right? Just a lazy choice. Or you need a collection, right? If I have a ton of variables with numbers on the end, that means I should have a list, an array, something else along those lines. Let's call this what it is. It's a roll. It's a die roll, a single die roll, right? So if I right-click this and refactor, I'll call this die roll. S can kind of determine what that is pretty easily, right? But let's talk about the name of it. I know that it's very tempting to call it sum, and that's better than S. I agree with you. Better than S. We can be more descriptive than that. It's the sum of the roll, right? It's the sum of the entire throw. The sum of the entire throw, all of the dice. Be more descriptive when you can. Sum is such a generic term. It's used in many different places. Sum of what? What am I summing up? All right. I think we're almost done. There's really only a couple of variables that we haven't yet printed, although we haven't figured out what the error is yet. let's talk about the last two variables, and then maybe we can use it to help figure out why that last error is happening. This one we can see number of dice times 6 minus the number of dice. So that's an odd formula there that would be nice to be able to check. But how am I supposed to know what this should be if I don't know what this array represents? Right? How am I supposed to know how big this array should be if I don't know what this array represents? It looks like it's being used as a way to track how many times I've rolled a particular sum. We just did the array unit actually in 131. This is a frequency table, which is one of the problems we ask people to do when we teach them arrays in the intro class. This is a frequency table, right? I'm keeping track of how many times I rolled a 7, how many times I rolled a 12, how many times I rolled a 24, right? That's what this array is. So we can name that accordingly. I would actually go so far as to call it a roll frequency table. And then this last one is an abbreviation. Again, a bad idea. Bad idea to use abbreviations like this. As you've probably already noticed, I've been trying to be as descriptive as possible. And abbreviations do not help with that effort. So yacht being short for Yahtzee, the classic dice rolling game that, I mean, maybe you haven't heard of it or played it before, but it's a classic. Rolling a Yahtzee means that all of the numbers on the dice are the same. So if I roll 4 dice and they all show the same numbers, that's a Yahtzee. This variable is used to check or to count how many Yahtzees we have. So we should, I would say that naming it Yahtzees is okay, right? Actually, that's pretty good. Yahtzees. It's tempting to call it number of Yahtzees. I mean, I'm not sure that I like having number of up here. Maybe just calling these dice and throws is okay. Could try it. Costs nothing to change a variable name. So if you don't like the name that you've got, try it a different way and see how you like it. See if it looks better. It is somewhat subjective. So just because you like it a certain way doesn't mean that somebody else will like it a certain way. Oh, throws is not a valid Java identifier. That's kind of funny that happened. Throws is a keyword. Throws exists in Java already. Just like I couldn't use if as the name of a variable or for the name of a variable. It's not going to let me do that. Whoops. So for that one, I'm not sure what I would even do to... throws with 2 S's, that feels a little hacky. I'm not sure I'm satisfied with that. It's a tricky problem though, right? It's a tricky problem. So now maybe we can try and figure out what's going on here. If with the frequency table, there's some kind of an error that's happening and it's on line 25 it said, or let's run it again and see. Yeah, line 25 it says there's some kind of an error. It's because, well, we see J is going, I'm looking at neighbors. I'm trying to count the Yahtzees. This is where we're trying to count the Yahtzees. Trying to count the Yahtzees. So we're basically asking if all of the neighbors... I actually don't think this is the right way to approach things. Right way to approach looking for Yahtzees, looking at the neighbors. Well, actually, no, it would work. But the issue is that we're not stopping soon enough. The array index out of bounds exception we see is probably because of the j+1. We can fix that by stopping 1 short. Let's see if that fixes things. Okay, I think we got a lot farther. Index 25 out of bounds for length 20. This time the error is on line 29 and has to do with our frequency table, our roll frequency table. So it's telling me that I rolled a 25 right? I rolled a 25, but my array wasn't big enough. It wasn't expecting me to roll a 25. So is this value wrong, or am I able to roll a 25? If I have 4 dice, I'm assuming 6-sided dice, I should only be able to roll 24, correct? That would be the largest value. This would be 24. Why is the minus on here? I think that might be the bug. How did I roll a 25 though, too? Also confused about that. Let's look at this. Oh. I see what happened. 12 plus 3 plus 5 plus 3 plus 2 gets me 25, yeah? I see what happened. It's another classic bug. The sum of the throws is not getting reset every time I start a new throw. This should be declared, or this should be reset rather, inside of this loop. The sum should be reset back to 0 every time. Think about how long it took me to solve that just now. I'm familiar with this code, right? And I stared at that problem and I was like, think about how much harder that would have been with the original variable names that we had on this code compared to what we have now. Much easier to try and decipher what's going on. Oh, okay, so the code actually ran this time. Looks great. Summing we're rolling zeros though. Whoops. That's not supposed to happen. That has to do with this guy right here. I think there should be a +1 going on. And then this should be 6. Alright, now we're getting only proper values. I was trying to see if we get, it says there's 4 Yahtzees. That's not right. Oh my goodness, errors all over this code. 4 Yahtzees. That's not correct. I'm not so sure that it's important to keep fixing the bugs in this code. I mean, those are intentionally put in there to show you how difficult it is to find bugs when things are not easy to understand. I think what I would prefer to do instead of figuring out how to count Yahtzees is take a step back and examine our finished code, right? And we can also compare it to the original code to see just how different it looks, right? With the different, well, my text is too big over here, isn't it, to let me do that. That's kind of annoying. Now, that's maybe the biggest argument that I hear about the things that I did today, is that, okay, doesn't it make this code look a lot bigger? Doesn't it make this code, it takes up more space on the screen, right? It takes up a lot more space on the screen than what we originally started with. You can see how much thinner this code looks. Some of that is the fact that I have the text blown up on my ellipse so that you all can see it easier on the projector. But some of it is clearly we made these names larger. I would argue right back, that's a good thing. Our goal here is not to make code as short as possible, right? When is that the goal? When has that ever been the goal? That is the goal when you're trying to get things done as quickly as possible, right? I'm going to make my variable names as short as possible because that's fewer things I have to type whenever I need to use that variable. You're not wrong, and I'm also not asking you to stop doing things that way. I want to make that very clear, right? I do things that way. When I am in the zone and I'm trying to get a project done, I call my variables whatever the first thing is that pops into my head, and I roll with it until I get things done. But especially if I'm going to show this code to other people, if it's going to go through a peer review process, right, being looked at by other professional developers, which is what people get paid to do, then I'm gonna take the time to go back and clean it up and make it look nice. And you know, especially with some of the wild variable names that I've seen you all come up with on some of your assignments. My favorite is, I mean, it happens every semester where you just get somebody submit an assignment full of butts and poops and farts for your variable names. Like, it's a classic, right? Who's not gonna laugh at that? Everybody's done that. But that's not professional code that you want to show to your boss, right? Necessarily. So go clean up the poops and the butts and the farts after you're done having your fun with them. Make them actual descriptive names. And we're not done talking about naming yet, actually. I know we spent a ton of time talking about variable names, and that is certainly very important. But there's more to naming than just variables. So think about what other times we have control over the choice of the names of things in our code. Instance variables and variables, well, variables of any kind. I suppose you could also throw parameters into the mix. Notice that all of the names that I chose, every single one, is a noun. Right? It's a part of, if I classify it as an English part of speech, it is a noun. It is a thing. Maybe it's an abstract thing that doesn't actually, I can't hold it in my hands, right? But it's a noun, thing. So variable names should always be nouns. The class name should also always be a noun. Always be a noun. For the class names, I would actually argue kind of the opposite of what I would argue for variable names. They should be hopefully very simple, short, and sweet. If you have a class name that is giant, I'm not going to say that never happens, but it could be an indication that your class is trying to do too much. Usually we want our objects to be as short and concise as possible. Just focus on doing one thing, and doing it very well. So we don't typically like our class names to get long and complicated like our variable names can sometimes get. I think this is kind of an okay class name for what we're doing. Maybe next class we'll talk about how we can improve that a little bit. And then methods. Methods are the other big things that we have control over naming. So there are some situations when the method name is pretty clear. Getters and setters, right, have a pretty standard format. In fact, I don't even write them usually. Just let Eclipse do that for me. But for other methods, they should be verbs. Methods are actions. Methods are behaviors. The names should reflect the action that's being performed. Getters and setters also follow that, right? I'm getting something, I'm setting something. So the names of your methods should always be the action that's being performed. Compute something, do something, right? Verbs are great choices for method names. This is something that, again, just to kind of be a little bit more forward thinking, we're going to be doing peer review on the project that's coming up. So I was just checking the calendar. We have 3 more weeks before spring break, and we're going to talk about the project on that last week, right before spring break. So just as a little reminder of that, you might want to start talking to your neighbors and forming groups if you haven't done so already. I think that's it for today. We're going to end class a little early today. Don't have anything else really to go over with you, but on Wednesday we're going to talk about methods. So I hope you all come back. If anybody's having trouble with the homework assignment, there are some assignment questions. I'll stick around. Come chat to me if you have any questions about that. But otherwise, enjoy your week, and I'll see you back here on Wednesday, okay? Give me just 1 second. I'll be right with you. Just want to turn the recording off.